So then all of a sudden, like all of these doors, I was open to anything, and all these doors opened. And, you know, as they say, like the rest is history. And I'm just very thankful that I have, you know, lived through my heart in that way. And I just encourage anybody, allow yourself to be challenged in that way. Allow yourself to figure out who you are outside of other people's expectations, because I really surprised myself. I never, ever thought I would be a teacher. And it's my favorite thing to do now.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm joined by my good friend, Shana Lipner Grover. She co-owns Sage Country Herbs. I want to say it's in San Diego, California, probably just outside of it. But welcome to the show, Shayna.
Thank you so much, Mason. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. And, you know, my first question was going to be about the event that you just had, but now I'm going to change it up and I'm going to ask you about your background. You were telling me that it's Mimulus, but actually they renamed it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what flower that is?
Okay, that background. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So for those of you just listening, this is also on the YouTube channel, and Shana has this really dope background of a mimulus flower, what I know as monkeyflower. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the background you got going on?
Sure. So this used to be a mimulus. This is used to be Mimulus aurantiacus, the sticky monkey flower. And it is a bush down here. It's super common. They come in this really beautiful yellowy orange, and then they get in, there's different variations that get into like more brighter orange, and then there's some like really deep red ones, and they're big flowers. I mean, they're not this big, they're not as big as my head, but they're a good, you know, good like quarter size flower. So in terms of keying, for anybody who has tried keying like teeny tiny things like chickweed, it is not really easy when it's really hard to see things, but something like this, when it's like the size of a quarter and you can see these like longitudinal folds down here and this open stigma here, it really like makes it stand out. And then over here, it's a great picture actually, because you can see the tubular fused nature of the petals, and that's a really important part. So then the genus of Mimulus, originally monkey flowers were in the Scrophulariaceae, and then the scroff family was basically pulled apart, and all the Mimulus went into their own family called the Framaceae, or the lopseed family. And then the genus of Mimulus was broken down into 3 different ones. I believe it's Mimulus and Diplacus and Erythanthe, I think is the other one. I don't see too many of those. But the one that we learned about in Columbine's, our alma mater, was Mimulus guttatus, which I believe is now Erythanthe guttatus. That's the seep monkey flower, the one that's used in flower essences. This one is, it's more bushy, and you can even see some of those little hairs up here. It's pretty sticky with some resin. And right now in Southern California, you know, where I'm at is North County, San Diego. San Diego is actually a really big county. And when people think of San Diego, they think of the city, but actually North County is like all like old avocado and citrus groves. We are like surrounded by food. And these are really, really common in the like sage scrub and on the edges of chaparral. You see a lot like hillsides, like covered in these like brightly colored flowers. They're just so, so beautiful.
Yeah, you're making me want to go back to herb school, because I'm just like stuck on Scrophulariaceae and Mimulus, and I gotta up my game again. But so speaking of where you're from, I know you just hosted an event, or I believe you were one of the main organizers. Why don't you tell us about the Sage Country Herb Festival that just happened?
It was the coolest. It was really fun. So it came from, there is an herbalist that does named Benjamin Pixie. He does these traveling Pixie traveling medicine shows, and he was coming down. He comes down from Washington regularly. And he had reached out to me about hosting him, because I've hosted him before. And that was like back in November. And so we hosted him in December for a little marketplace. And I pulled some of my other students who already make stuff and friends of Sage Country Herbs, and we did it under this like magical oak grove, and it was really wonderful. And at that point I was like, oh, okay, organizing is really cool, and doing free events for the public, it's getting harder and harder in today's world to find events to do with like your family that don't cost like an extreme amount, especially in Southern California. And so then I started thinking about, well, a festival. Originally, my thought was I want to give a way for my students to be involved in what you can do as an herbalist, because, we're not a regulated industry. You don't generally like look up on Craigslist for a job and find herbalists wanted very much. And so I wanted to create an environment where, some students who are already vending could do that. Some students who either have taught or maybe haven't taught, but feel they have something to share could do that. Or just people could volunteer and be part of how to organize an event. And so that's what we did. We just did mini classes. So they're just like 30 to 45 minutes. Originally, I was going to do like one plant walk and one other class. And then slowly over the course of just 2 months, it evolved into like so many people wanted to teach classes. And then I have numerous yoga teachers who are students or past students. And then all of a sudden we had, I think it was like 3 to 4, it was a plant walk, a yoga or body movement class, and then 2 other classes every hour for like, I think it was like, 1, 2, and 3. And then we had kids classes, because I've got numerous past students that are teaching kids. And so we had kid classes all those times as well. And then the marketplace was absolutely epic. I like to joke that, I've never been offered the keynote speaker at any conference, so I had to throw my own in order to be my own keynote speaker. But ultimately the real, at first it was just, hey, let's do something that is free to the public that kind of showcases our students and all the things that they do. And not just our students, but also the friends. I've got numerous guest teachers that come in, that have herbal businesses of their own. But very quickly I realized, if we host this on a farm, then we can highlight the fact that Sage Country Herbs works in community with our local farms. And that's one of the big, it's really one of the big like pillars of what we do. If I think about like what it is that we are teaching, it's like we've got kind of have like 3 pillars. And like one is ethics in how we approach the world, ethics in how we approach our herbal practice, and how we promote and produce our community. The second pillar is community, because there are so many farms around Southern California. And I like to explain it as, every farmer is kind of gambling their livelihoods with every seed they plant, because it's very few jobs out there where like you have to dedicate your time, energy, money into your product with the possibility that that product will never come to fruition, and so it really is a gamble. And the more people that understand how incredibly vital our local farms are, especially like, back during the pandemic, the really hot time of the pandemic, getting more people to do things outside and to realize that our food is not just from grocery stores, and that when you go to farms, not only do you get like the freshest food you can possibly get, you're also supporting your local community. You're putting your dollars directly into your local community, and you're supporting all of the other activities happening on the farm, which so many farm schools popped up during that time, because parents are like, oh my gosh, like I got to get my kid outside. They need to like go run around, and what a great place to do that on a farm. And so we ended up partnering with San Diego Food Shed. And that is a nonprofit that was created by some good friends of mine at Solidarity Farm. And it's now a conglomeration of, I think it's like 35 or 40 farms that all work together to get their extra produce to basically CSA boxes that go to lower income areas, and to make more food security for lower income areas, both low income and BIPOC communities. And because so much of the good food and organic movement has slowly gotten pigeonholed into really, really expensive food. And so Food Shed is about recognizing that every farm has more than what they can possibly do with. And if we can bring our extra together, we can get more food out. We can have more food security in our lower income communities. And that is vitally important. So we had a raffle, which was absolutely epic. And then we donated a part of our proceeds from the raffle to San Diego Food Shed. We had the festival on a farm, so we got people coming to the farm, which is just beautiful. We have all of these coast live oaks that are pretty ancient, and a lot of the places that we work with have these, what used to be really large, oak woodlands, and now they're just, small little areas. But to be able to gather with people who are like-minded, supporting our community, and recognize that we're gathering on Kumeyaay land. We're gathering on Kumeyaay territory. A lot of these parks and farms still have, large granite stones with grinding stones that were used for thousands of years by the Kumeyaay. Like, there's a real sacredness to recognizing that the land that we're on, that we're appreciating and cultivating, has been appreciated and cultivated by the indigenous of this area, which are really vast. We have a lot of tribes, and primarily where I focus is on the Kumeyaay Nation, which is San Diego County, and it does go down, past the Mexican border and into Baja, but we really focus on this upper north area.
Yeah,
so, yeah, there you go.
I've got so many different questions for you. First of all, is this going to be an annual event? Are you going to be?
Yeah.
Okay. So every year, will it always be like around Herb Days, like say the first weekend in May?
Yeah. That's the plan, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is the booming, most beautiful time of year down here. When most of the rest of the country that deals with snow and more intense weather are just in the melting, things are just starting to come up. Yeah. We're in the prime, even almost getting to the end of our edible weed season. Mm-hmm. Everything is blooming in April and May around here. Come summer solstice, most native plants are drying up and going, we have dormancy during our really hot summers instead of dormancy during a snowy winter. So April and May are just this popping time. And the other reason is that because I do a field apprenticeship that we meet every other weekend for the first year from January through the end of May. And then I also have a second year that meets one weekend a month, which means I only have one weekend a month to do anything outside of my field apprenticeship on a weekend. And I want this festival to be on a weekend so more families can participate. So yeah, it is planned to be an annual event, most likely in the first weekend in May, because that's generally my one open weekend in May. And then the other thing is, shameless plug for, it's when we open up registration for our Foundational Herbalism class that starts in June. So it's turned into this really beautiful, multifaceted, bring the community together, celebrate spring, get more awareness for farms. And hey, by the way, we have a class coming up, and getting more people from the public to know, who Sage Country Herbs is and what we're offering.
Ain't no shame in your game, Shayna. We'll be talking more about the foundational program later on in the show. I also have to ask, what was your keynote about?
My keynote was about working together as community. And when we recognize that, especially down here in Southern California, we have a 12-month growing season. The amount of abundance of food and medicine is astronomical down here. But if we, as being me as a field teacher, if all I do is teach people to go out into the field and harvest that abundance, there's some wonderful abundance in the field, but we also live amongst 22 million people. Yeah. So if everybody thinks of nature as this free abundance, then we actually ruin it. Yeah. So what is much more viable is to recognize that every farm has more food and medicine than even the farmers realize. I was just at a local farm and did our final campouts. And one of the cool things about our final campouts is these folks have been with me for 6 months. I trust their ethics. And so our final campout is on a farm. It's half out in the wilderness and then half on the farm. And on the last day, we do a plant walk where they get to now they get to look at all this abundance and take advantage of it. And so here's just a really simple example of that. Okay, 2 examples. One, this farm is growing strawberries. I mean, the strawberries are amazing. To actually pluck a sun-warmed strawberry and pop it in your mouth. Oh, so good. But beyond that, strawberries produce a ton of leaves. Well, those leaves are a lovely rose family astringent. And I've been using organically cultivated strawberry leaves in my witch hazel toner for years. And so, and what does the farm do with the leaves? Nothing. They leave them there to photosynthesize. Well, each plant has so many leaves, it can easily donate a couple of leaves so that we can, infuse them. You could dry them and use them like raspberry leaves in a tea, a nice, sweet astringent. The other example I have is down here, we have this plant called telegraph weed, or it's also called Mexican arnica. It's in the Asteraceae family. And so it is in the same family as arnica, but it's not actually related. It is called Heterotheca, and that is Mexican arnica. So Mexican arnica has been, I learned from Stephen Yeager at Mountain Rose, it is known as an adulterant to arnica. So sometimes when they get arnica, they will actually find that it is Mexican arnica. And there's been that confusion because, as we all know, or we should know, that common names, like most plants, have 5 to 10 common names. And so it's easy to get them confused. But the coolest thing about Mexican arnica is that it's non-toxic, whereas arnica is a toxic plant. Well, Mexican arnica grows like a weed down here. It's non-toxic. And the coolest thing about it is that you can use it for a lot of the same reasons. It's a wonderful anti-inflammatory. It's been used historically by curanderas and curanderos in Mexico for arthritic joint issues. Since moving down here, I've been here for, I think, 15 years. I love moving my focus of herbal medicine into what are the weedy, invasive, naturalized plants that are, often just like, oh, that's just a weed. Yeah. Well, Mexican arnica loves disturbance. And so it is, even though it is a native plant, it grows like it's a weed. Since moving down here, I have tried it. Let's see. I've infused it into oil for a massage oil. It's lovely. I've taken a bath in it. I've drank it as tea. I've tinctured it, and it's a really nice aromatic bitter. And then I also used it. I made an Herbs Day California spice blend using local plants that were growing around me. And it's got this really savory, almost like oregano type of scent. So it blended so well with rosemary and sage and some fennel, which is naturalized invasive around here. So yeah, I love being able to take people to farms, and we're not even touching the farm plants primarily. We're working with the things growing around. And when you're an organic farm, you always have weeds, and most of those weeds are edible and or medicinal. So what a great way to focus when you're surrounded by 22 million people is to get more people going to farms and get more people recognizing that the abundance that we have of invasive and naturalized medicine it's hard to honestly be able to take it all in of how much is here. It's really just about education and learning everything.
I'm so glad we're talking about this because I was going to ask you about building relationships with farms, because I know you covered that in your Eat Your Weeds course. Couple questions. Is it important to focus on, say, approaching organic farms? And in addition to that, what's some practical advice as to, say, approaching a farmer or a farm and just starting to build that relationship? How would you go about doing that? Do you just I'll let you take it from there, but those are essentially my 2 questions surrounding that.
No, those are fantastic questions. Okay. So the first one, none of the farms I work with are actually certified organic through the USDA. Right. But in having relationships with them, they all abide by those. They just haven't paid the $15,000 to get that certification. Right. So by cultivating a relationship with them, now I understand where is their focal point in their growing. Do they use pesticides? If they do, what kind are they? The farms that I work with don't actually use any pesticides. And they do a lot of manual labor to be able to get rid of their weeds. And that's just another thing we do in my field apprenticeship. When we do campouts on farms, we donate. We've got like usually 12 to 14 people. And so we donate our time and we help, weed a bed while we're there, or weed last time we weeded, we wed. like a 1/4 acre of carrots, which, it's a root vegetable. If you don't pull those little weeds, then their roots will compromise the ability of the carrots to actually get fat and juicy. Sure. So being able to donate our time in that way. So really cultivating that relationship with the farmer allows us to know, like, is it an organic farm? Is it, honestly, I don't care if somebody has paid for certification. I care about where their values lie. And if somebody has a value of growing organically, but is not paying for that certification, they are putting their like blood, sweat, and tears into maintaining a farm without pesticides. And they will be more than happy to talk about that. Furthermore, the farms that I work with are, numerous of them are leaders in the regenerative farming and teaching other farms how to do more for carbon sequestration into the earth using plants and cover crops and no-till methods. And so the more we, work with these farms and realize there's so much more that you can do than just use pesticides. And a lot of these farms are not big enough to be able to afford to get certified, but it doesn't mean they're any less focused on, they're doing it because they want to do it, not because they're, paying for it. Not to put that down in any way, but I just recognize supporting small local farms. A lot of them can't afford that certification, but it doesn't mean their quality standards are low. You just have to talk to them about it. The second question, I've actually gotten a lot of, how did you do this? Well, so honestly, the first 2 farms that I've been working with for a long time, one was actually Ellie Igo, who is one of the co-owners of Solidarity Farm with her husband, Nan. I actually met Ellie 25 years ago in Eugene when I was at the beginning of my herbal studies, when I was like a head chef at the vegan cafe at Morning Glory Cafe. And Ellie actually was one of the volunteers and people that helped to run the growers co-op, which was like right around the corner. And so I made breakfast for her without realizing it, many times. And one of the people that I worked with, Stephen, at Morning Glory, was working with Ellie. And so I reconnected with Stephen and he said, "Oh, you should come out to the farm. You probably know Ellie." And I went out and I met Ellie and I was like, "Wait, I recognize your face." And then we realized, like, oh, wow, we were in community 25 years ago in completely different ways. Wow. And never would we have guessed that like 25 years later, we'd each have our own businesses that were working in community to support each other. So that just worked out. And then once, that was just like our meeting, but then it's like, okay, how do I work with this farm? Like, I'm not personally a farmer. I like to grow plants, but it's not my forte. My husband actually does most of our gardening, and runs the back of our website. Brandon's very involved. But in working with these farmers, I realized very quickly, like, oh, I have access to people who want to take classes from me. And where is the best classroom? Like, sure, I can go and rent a classroom and run a PowerPoint. I've done that. But what is way, way, way better is to have your classroom actually be on the earth, surrounded by plants, so people can organoleptically experience plants. They can see them, they can smell them, they can often taste them because they're being grown on a farm, can identify them. There's just so much to be done. So I started doing those Eat Your Weeds classes. And then I was teaching at another school, at a holistic health school as well. And one of my students was also a farmer. So I started doing classes at that farm, and every farmer I have met, when I explain what I do with Eat Your Weeds, I open it up to usually 15 to 20 people. We bring people to a farm. They pay for the class. I then donate part of that money to the farm. We help pick the weeds on the farm, which is helping the farmer. The people who are paying for the class are learning identification. They're also learning how to harvest. and they're learning how to process. We then process it together. We make weedy pesto, and everybody gets to leave with something. So they pay for education, experience, and the most nutritious, delicious pesto on the planet. The farmer gets money from me thanking them. They get their weeds harvested, and the farmers often also have like farm stands. So then my students are also going and buying stuff. So it's this like win-win-win relationship. And that's really what Sage Country Herbs was really started on, that creating these win-win-win relationships, that we act like there's like a winner and a loser to everything. But if we all benefit, then we all win. And if we focus more on everybody winning, then we're actually practicing being in community together. Every farmer I've ever told and introduced to what I do is like, can you do eat your weeds on my farm? So the idea of like, how do you get this started? Just tell a farmer you want to bring people to their farm, to their organic farm or their no spray, no pesticide farm, and have people come and work for free to harvest their weeds. Like, that's all you have to say. And most farmers are like, do I have to do anything? And no, you don't actually have to do anything. Just tell us where you don't want us to weed from. And it's like every farmer that I've ever met is like, can you do that on my farm? So much so that it is now the goal that we are working on. The next phase of Sage Country Herbs will be an ethical teacher training, where we want to train people to teach Eat Your Weeds classes on farms. And it's our goal in the long run to be a community hub and to have like an Eat Your Weeds or wild food foraging or a plant walk on a different farm every single weekend throughout the spring. Because we've got this really long spring down here. Half of winter is spring for us. And there's no reason, like, there's like so many people down here. And so there's no reason to not have this. And I really also like to always throw out like a shout out for Howie Brownstein, because I learned so much from the Columbine School. And one of the quotes that I remember learning from Howie that I really, really have taken to heart is, yes, I want to train, what some people might say, oh, but you're going to be training your competition. Are you sure you want to do that? And Howie's quote was, the more herbalists we have means the more the public has access to herbalism. So no, I'm not concerned about training my competition. I'm concerned about training my community, and that I don't have enough hours in the day to be able to teach all of the classes that not only do I want to teach, but that farms and nurseries and farm schools and nature schools are offering me to teach. Like, I am very, very, very grateful for the amount of abundance down here, because it's not just herbs and food. It's also people that want to learn and people that want to employ me to teach them. And so I need to train more people so that we can train more people about how to use the abundance around us instead of just spray it with poison.
I love this show so much. I love your mission. I think that's so important. And really, you're the only person that comes to mind. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are doing this work. I'm sure. But I feel like I've heard you promote this idea the most, and I absolutely love it, and it's super important. And just a little tidbit of bit of advice from me. I'm sure you could kind of Google what farms are around you, but I do know of two websites that promote local growers, and Mountain Rose Herbs has one of them. It's called the local growers page. And although they're not technically certified organic, but to Shayna's point, they don't need to be certified. They just need to be no spray. So they have a pretty robust list of a bunch of different herb farms and vegetable farms throughout the United States. And you could go there and look at it and find a bunch of herb farms and vegetable farms growing in your neck of the woods. And you could reach out to them. And then I know Rosalie De La Forêt also has a list of herb farms on her website as well. So that could be one gateway into like trying to find various farms in your area.
Yeah. You can also go to a local farmer's market and look for, at farmer's markets, you definitely need to talk to people. If they say they're organic, that's one thing. You can just go up and I have done that as well. Mostly the farms I work with, I have met through a community, but you absolutely can go to local farmers markets, but you need to talk to them. If they're not organic, talk to them like, are you local? Are you, do you grow with organic standards, or do you use different pesticides? Because so much of our culture is like, being interpreted through just screens. Right. And we're missing out on that. Like when you actually engage with people at the farmer's market and talk about like, why do you do this? What is your perspective? What's your mission in being a farmer? Yeah. And then, that way you can really see those local, because I think it's wonderful that there are, hubs like Mountain Rose and Rosalie that have these farms listed. But I know from my own perspective, it's hard for, like, most of the farms I work with are not in this herbal community. So they're not connected to Mountain Rose necessarily. Yeah. And so being able to also like tap into your local community, and maybe then I should be letting these farms that I work with know, hey, you guys should actually get on the list for Mountain Rose and, and maybe Rosalie. And that could be also a really cool way of just continuously weaving the threads of this, not just this local Southern California community, but also we have so much abundance. Let's get us out there and get more people also knowing about that type of abundance.
In person's always better. I definitely agree with you on that regard. In fact, I was like, oh, I can't wait to, be with Shayna in person so we could do an interview in person. So ironically, we're doing this online, but that's okay. It's better than nothing. So we're 30 minutes into the show and we're just about to start chronologically. So I'm excited to hear about Shayna's early on, like, I'd like to hear your herbal origin story, if you will. Like, how did you even get into herbalism?
So I was a nature-loving kid.
Hippie.
Okay. By my own definition. I made my way from Michigan. Mostly I like to climb trees. I like to go camping. I like to go hiking. And I made my way to the West Coast, to Oregon. And I just, as soon as I got to like the ecosystem of Oregon, I was just like, oh. And then I remember I enrolled myself into Lane Community College pretty soon after arriving. So I just, I was, I think 20. So I just wanted to like, it's actually, college, especially community college, is a great way to meet people and to see what's going on in your community. I took this one class on, it was like holistic modalities, I think. And I remember the teacher, Wendy, invited, I think it was like 10 different people who practice different holistic modalities. And I honestly don't remember any of them except for one. And it was Ren Davidson. And I have never reached out to Ren Davidson before, but hopefully maybe she's listening to this, or maybe I can cool. Find her on Facebook, because she doesn't know that she actually was one of my inspirations to become an herbalist. So she cool. Came in and she was just this like beautiful nature goddess. And she in her presentation and she had all of these beautiful flowers, and so there's cool stuff to look at. And I remember she started her lecture with, I've been an herbalist for 25 years and I haven't been sick in 25 years, haven't had a cold. And I was like, I grew up in Michigan. It was, rainy and snowy, 6 months out of the year, at least, if not more. And I was lactose intolerant growing up, but I didn't want to believe it. So I continuously ate ice cream and drank milk and that type of thing. And so I felt like I was always sick. And if I wasn't always sick, I had this congestion, which then made me more susceptible to catching every cold. And so this idea that you could live a lifestyle and not get sick. And keep in mind, my mom was a hippie and totally tried to, raise us in this natural way. And I definitely rebelled against some of that. But then I came back to it and I found that actually my mom started that path within me. And I definitely, I headbutted with her about it. And yet the things that I headbutted with my mom when I was a kid are the things that I absolutely love the most now. Like upcycling and, working, with your friend community. And so that started me. And then I found a local class that was the Center for Herbal Studies with Cherie Caps off Lorraine Highway. And I remember doing that class and being really inspired. And then I wanted to go kind of more in the like witchy direction. And I found Blue Iris Botanicals, which was Colette Gardner's school back then. I happened to find her on her last year before she was moving up to Portland and basically closing her herb school and starting a magic school. So I got in on that last time. That was an advanced clinical study program. And so I thought like, okay, I'm done. I've done like my advanced study. But then Howie and Steven from the Columbine School came in as guest teachers, and they were going to take us out into the field and teach us some basic field botany. Well, more than half of my class, you know this, Mason, that like, because we don't have regulation in the herbal world, every herbal school has a slightly different perspective, lots of overlap, but slightly different perspective. So herb schools in the same area, they share students, right? So more than half of my class had already taken the Columbine School. So I remember going out, it was 3 of us. It was me, Diana, and Will. And we got to go out, 3 students with Howie and Steve, 3 students, 2 teachers. We went out and we learned about ceanothus. And before the end of the day, I was like, take my money. Where do I sign up? Like, I don't know, like, I don't even know what I'm getting into, but I am diving in because something about going out into the field and, you know, like both my first 2 herbal apprenticeships were garden based and they were lovely. There's something about, because I love hiking, like getting out and meeting the plants where they're at. Everything changed at that point. So I did Columbine School. Everything they offered, I did at least twice. Some of the things I did 3 times as a teacher trainer. I learned how to teach from Howie and Steven primarily because it's taken me a while to kind of be able to formulate this into words. What I found with how Columbines taught was they didn't just teach you to learn the plants and the ecosystems and the herbal actions and all of that. They taught you how to learn. So that even when you're not a student, you can continue learning. Because otherwise, like you move to a new, like you learn all of these, you know, Pacific Northwest plants, and then you move to Wisconsin and you're like, okay, well, I recognize some things, but a lot of things are really different. Well, Columbines teaches you how to learn, not just here's what's important, memorize this, but here's how you continue learning that. And so by studying with Columbines for an extended period of time, I not only learned, you know, the plants, I also learned how to learn new plants, how to learn new ecosystems. And quite frankly, I learned field botany, and there's very few things in life that have brought me that much joy than being able to gaze into a beautiful flower like this. And then what I've come to and being down here and really learning plants is just by spending more and more time, you learn these little things like, you know, like this sensitive stigma and how it's made to be sensitive. It's actually part of the family characteristics that monkey flowers have a sensitive stigma that when a pollinator touches it, it closes, which then lets the next pollinator know, I'm done. I've got no nectar for you. Go on, find another flower. You wouldn't know that unless you actually took the time to sit next to this plant and gaze deeply into it and use your botanical eyes to really, you know, get to know it like a friend, so that I would not confuse a monkey flower with, say, like a sage flower. They both have 2 petals on top and 3 fused petals on the bottom. They're called bilabiate. They have like 2 lips, like this one over here, you know, kind of looks like it's talking. And yet, like, they're totally different families. And so that's why we call our community herbalism program botanical eyes, because for me, learning to slow down and really spend that time to get to know plants in the way that you do when you're getting to know a friend, a human. I like to use this example of one of the owners of one of the farms that I work at. Her name is Jessica. She's about the same height as my best friend, Jessie. They both have dark hair. They both have indigenous, you know, backgrounds.
Sure.
They're both powerful, powerful women. And they have the same name. And they both serve really powerful roles in my life. Yeah. And yet, I would never confuse them in any way, because I know them, because I have this relationship with them. Well, I've translated that to developing these relationships with plants. I wouldn't confuse this plant with a sage, even though in a book, it might be described using similar terms. I wouldn't confuse it at all because I know it, because I have a relationship with it.
I love that. And kind of going back to the whole online or in books versus in person, you really can't beat in-person lectures and teaching and being in the old growth forest of the West Cascades. And it's kind of what you're doing now, teaching. But kind of before we get into that, I'm curious, what are some other herbal mentors of yours? I want to say you studied with Michael Moore.
I did. And it's wonderful because Michael wrote the primary books used in the Southwest for medicinal herbs. And so I actually have some of Michael's books be on our list for our field program, because I'll tell people, look, you never need to bring this book out into the field with us. But when we're covering ceanothus and we key it and we talk about the medicine of it and, you know, how to ethically harvest it, then I'll say, okay, your homework is go home and read Michael's chapter about ceanothus, because he really, you know, his books are pretty old now. You know, he passed in 2009. I studied with him in his final year. It was, I believe, his 27th and final year was 2006. And those books primarily were written in the 90s and early 2000s. So, you know, they certainly are older now, but they're still, as far as the Southwest, they're still some of the best books to really get to know these local plants. And a lot of our local plants in Southern California are not common plants in every herbal. You know, like there are some overlap, but, you know, like growing up, dandelions were everywhere in Michigan. Like they're everywhere in the Midwest. Here you find them, but not nearly as commonly. Burdock is a weed in Michigan. Burdock doesn't even grow here. I mean, you might be able to, we have a relative called cocklebur, but we don't generally have burdock here. And so we do have a lot of yellow dock. But my point is, having access to Michael's books allows you, if you really want to dive into the medicine of the Southwest, you need to be more present with it, because there's not as many easy access herbals to just be like, oh yeah, you can use this for that. So I've been really, really blessed with, Michael. So those were actually my 4 schools: the Center for Herbal Studies with Cherie Capps, Colette Gardner and Blue Iris Botanicals, Howie and Steve, and Hill and Karen Keaton were like my teachers back then, with the Columbine School. And then I went down to Michael's school. So I did 4 full herbal programs. And then I'm a forever student. I love learning. So I love going to conferences and taking classes. I love developing classes, because it forces me to really focus in and really try to become an expert on the material. So I would consider, like, Paul Bergner's definitely one of my mentors. I didn't take his school, but I've taken many classes from him, and he was a guest teacher at Michael's. One of the people that I would consider a mentor, but I've never taken a live class or actually even met her, is Rosemary Gladstar. I mean, like, what a powerhouse, and just, like godmother of the Western herbal, world. And I'm so incredibly, I love her story, how she's she plants seeds and then lets them go off with other herbalists. And then she plants more seeds and plants more seeds. And I absolutely love that. Like, she embodies that idea of cultivating community, but also recognizes that we need more community in other places. So, when I first was studying in Eugene, the, ongoing joke is you can throw a stone and hit a naturopath, an herbalist, and a massage therapist on every corner. And, and I was in this great community of herbalists. And then I moved down here and I was Southern California is so big. There's so many people. It took a while for me to actually meet the herbalists, but I started teaching pretty soon. And I realized I'm training a lot of the future herbalists of this area, and then I met, Elise Higley, who, Elise and Jeff that run Oshala Farm. Well, Elise was one of the original organizers, or the original organizer of Terra Vita Herbal Symposium, our our main Southern California herbal conference, Elise actually took a class from me at one of the local schools that I taught at, and then invited me to teach at the conference that she was hosting. And that's when I met Julie James and Rebecca Altman and all these other herbalists that were already here, but were like pretty far away from each other. And then we started from there, we started the Southern California herbal community. And now we've got this like thriving community of a lot of teachers, and Theravada is no longer happening. But all the more reason why doing the little Sage Country Herbal Festival is so important, that we need more of this, you know, bringing it together.
Yeah. So speaking of Rosemary and speaking of events, you got to come back to your homeland of Michigan in September. Rosemary is one of the keynote speakers at the Great Lakes Herb Fair. And so I'm just going to say, Shayna, you got to go to the event, unless you're teaching class that weekend, but which you probably are. But I kind of want to stick on Michael more, because I was just kind of curious if you could kind of maybe tell us a fond memory you have of him, like any sort of story or anything.
Oh, gosh. Which one? It's definitely important to remember when I studied with Michael, he was already on kidney dialysis. You know, that was his demise was his kidneys. So he was on kidney dialysis 3 times a week. It made it so that he wasn't as a happy-go-lucky person as some of his past students had talked about him being like really funny. He still was really funny, but he was definitely compromised. And so I recognize that. Thankfully, you know, Howie Brownstein was one of the teachers of physiology. And so he had come down for Michael Moore and was teaching. And so I already knew a lot of what Michael was teaching because Howie covers some of it. And I also got to spend some quality time with Michael because I was a student teacher with Howie.
Yeah.
And I was the work trade student. There's only 2 work trade students, and we came in early, you know, and helped clean the area, make tea for everybody. But that also meant that I got a little bit of extra time with Michael and Donna, and really appreciated and cherished that time. I will say the thing that really affected me the most from Michael was on the last day. The last day of this 5-month or 4-month course where we were all in school like 4 days a week. And the last week was a field trip. So everybody like packed all their stuff up, you know, and then we all went up to Colorado, and we went up to elevation. Michael couldn't do too much of elevation because of his kidneys. But we got to, you know, learn a lot of the plants in that area in Southern Colorado, and you know, it's the largest pedicularis I'd ever seen, and like fields of arnica, and just as well as like fields of aconite, one of the deadliest toxic plants, like just so much abundance in Colorado. And then everybody was leaving, and I was one of the last people. And I remember going up to Michael, and at that point I was already teaching the holistic health school here in Southern California. I was already teaching some classes there regularly, a couple times a year. And I had done some classes with my fellow students at Michael's. And so I remember asking Michael, like, since I'm already teaching, do you have any advice for me? And he said, yeah, I have some advice for you. There is no wild oregano around Taos, New Mexico. Learn from my mistakes. And I really took that to heart. So what he meant is that what he taught people to find, you know, and harvest wild oregano, and because he had his school in Taos, New Mexico for many, many years, and he taught people to harvest wild oregano. Well, he taught people who then started schools, who taught people who also started schools, who taught people, and they all use the same harvesting stands, to the effect that Michael recognized that if you always use those same harvesting stands, then if you have too many people harvesting from the same stands year after year after year, and you're not teaching them about cultivation, and you're not teaching them about, you know, the ethics of harvesting to make sure, you know, like one of the things I love that we did in Columbines and that I do with my students now is that I'll bring people, like I scout like crazy. So I know where we're going and I know the size of the stand, but I want my students to understand how to learn that. So we'll go to this area and I'll have everyone drop their bags in the middle of the area and everybody walk in a different direction and count the plants. And when you get to 20, you can turn around and come back. Or if you get to a point where you don't see any more of this one plant, we're focusing on one plant. If you get to a point where you don't see any more in front of you, just go ahead and turn around and come back. And I only take 7 people out into the field. But if you have 7 people say, oh, I counted 50, I counted 20, 20, 20, maybe 2 people counted 10 and then turned around and came back because they went in a direction that the stand didn't go. You put all of that together and you've got 1 to 300, shrubs of a plant. And it's like, okay, now we understand. And that's just within like 100 yards. And the stand is actually a lot bigger than that. So getting people to understand how much is here and what's appropriate for 7 people. And I do 2 classes. So that's 14 people are going to harvest from this stand. Yeah. Is it appropriate? Is there enough? And so I really appreciate that Michael recognized and took responsibility for the idea that just training people to harvest is not enough, that you need to teach people how to be more present with the stands that they're working with and be, as Columbine says, be stewards, be an ethical wildcrafter and be a steward of the earth, not domineering, not controlling, but acknowledging the roles that the different plants play and really making sure that your role within this ecosystem is not just one that is putting pressure on it, but that's actually helping to cultivate, help spread the seeds, maybe, break up plants that are too close together and replant them. Maybe start, transplant one of those plants into your garden and start cultivating it there. Michael really that was like a seed planted in my brain that, and very much in my heart, because that obviously contributes to the way that I conduct a school now amongst, living amongst 22, 23 million people. I realized that we need to be careful about that. And that's where the whole farming thing comes in, where it's just, what a great, it just segues right back into that, because that was a really powerful lesson to learn. And it wasn't something covered in herb school at all.
Yeah, and like you said, it is covered in Columbine School with the wild crafting checklist, which, dear listener, if you want to go check that out, I'm sure he has it at botanicalstudies.net. Shayna might have some resources on that as well. But also, thank goodness for the work of the United Plant Savers. I'm not sure if that organization was even around at the end of Michael Moore teaching or not. But they're about to celebrate 30 years.
So yeah, they were.
But they've definitely gained in popularity in the herbal community, and I feel it's at the forefront of the teaching a lot more is ethical wild harvesting, or not wild harvesting at all. Shayna, I do want to say it's been about 55 minutes, and I still have a ton of questions. Do you want to go over, or do you want to just do a round 2 sometime?
I'm fine with going over.
Okay, cool.
If you're okay with it.
I'm down to go literally as long as you want. So you just tell me when you're ready to pack it up, because
you can break it up, right?
Yeah, exactly. I could. I probably won't. I like those super long ones.
Cool.
But maybe in the future I will. But for the initial release, no. But you don't have plans in 15 minutes or something like that. All right, cool. Well, we're gonna keep rolling because we still gotta promote some things, and I had other fun questions. Cool. And you're a teacher at heart, so. You I ask you a question, you're teaching all of us. So I really love that. I appreciate that.
Kind of hard to shut me up.
That was the polite way of saying that. Yes. So yeah, I would like to hear how you went from gathering all that herbal knowledge from all the incredible teachers that you studied with. Wow. And you studied Columbine's numerous times and all this. When did that lead into forming Sage Country Herbs? And kind of now it's your school, it's your business, and kind of how did you meet your husband, Brandon, and how has that kind of evolved from student to teacher to now running Sage Country Herbs?
Okay, so
story time.
Okay, so I was absolutely terrified of public speaking. It was one of my number one fears growing up. I have I have a memory of like crying in the high school hallway because I had to give a 9-minute speech. Now, and it was terrible. I remember I was all shaky, and now I say this, but I also have always liked to challenge myself. So what did I make that high school 9-minute speech? We could choose what we wanted to talk about. What did I talk about? The very comfortable topic of rape. That was the topic I chose to talk about for 9 minutes. And even now I think back, like, why on earth did I choose such a like intense topic? So I say that because you say I'm a teacher at heart, and that's obvious now, but I had absolutely no drive to be a teacher whatsoever. I fell in love with herbal medicine. I fell in love with like the creative outlet of making products, primarily because I love helping people. I'm a caretaker. And so I really got into teaching because of Columbines. That really, it was Howie and Stephen that really like encouraged me to start teaching. And even with that, like, it was nerve-wracking, but I found that if I'm teaching about something that I'm passionate about, then all of a sudden it doesn't matter that I'm scared. What I really, I like to really get to the heart of things. Quite frankly, I don't like to lie to myself. And so when I really get to the heart of like, why was I terrified of public speaking? It's fear of judgment. That's what it really comes down to. And once I realized that when I'm teaching, I'm sharing, not only is it my passion, but I'm sharing information. And so it's not a judgment of me. If somebody is judging me, which I don't actually care at all anymore, but if they are, they're more judging my presentation, my information. It's not actually a judgment of me. And I've gotten to that point in life where I literally, have zero care about what other people think about what I do. And I've also found that like, when you present yourself to the world in this like passionate way, I get called a plant nerd, a botany geek, and I like wear that like a badge of honor. If you don't have enough passion that you look really geeky about something, I honestly kind of feel sorry for you, because finding something that you're that passionate about it's so powerful. Like, it means that I live a life of gratitude every single day. I am in so much gratitude for the life I live. So, okay, so there's that. So I started teaching with Columbines, but Columbines it was in a community of like so many herbalists. And when I was at like my 4th year with Columbines, that was when Michael was doing his last year, and Howie literally came to me and said, look, this is Michael's last year. This is your last chance to study with a master. And while you'll know a lot of what he's teaching, because I teach often like similar stuff, you'll be able to get a lot more out of his teaching because you already know those basics. Everybody else will be writing down the basic stuff, and you'll be understanding some of the deeper concepts that he's going into. And he was absolutely right. I was also at a transitory period in my life. I had ended a relationship. And so I was not tied down in any way. It was like I could do whatever I wanted. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, I could move to Arizona and I could do that. Well, that was around the time that I had been friends with my husband now, Brandon. We had been part of the same friend group. We had known of each other and been friends and hung out, in our similar friend groups at like the Oregon Country Fair. And so we had known of each other. Both of our relationships ended, around, a couple of years. And so then when I was moving to Arizona, I had just started kind of casually dating Brandon. But then I couldn't let that stop me. I couldn't let a casual dating experience stop me from like moving to Arizona and going to Michael's. Well, it turns out that Brandon grew up in Prescott, Arizona, and his family all lived in Phoenix. So because he also was, out of a long-term relationship, after a couple of years, he was looking to move back home and reconnect with his family. So we ended up moving around the same time. Now, we weren't close. Phoenix is like 4 hours from Bisbee. Bisbee is like very close to the border of Mexico. But we were close enough that we could drive and see each other like once a month. So we long distance dated for a little while. And by the end of that, it was really obvious that we were really good together. And we decided that we were going to move in, and we decided that we were going to move up to Prescott. Prescott had Prescott College, which is a nature environmental school. And I thought, oh, what a great like, place to be able to start. I didn't see any herb schools in Prescott. And I was like, oh, well, here's like a little niche. Maybe I can fill it. And there's like 40,000 people associated with Prescott College. 10 of them are bound to want to learn about plants, right? So I tried for 2 years to start an herb school in Prescott and failed miserably. I did some teaching at Yavapai Community College. I was a guest teacher at Prescott College. I was invited in. I generally could not get more than 2 to 3 people to show up to a plant walk. Wow. So after about 2 years, and the other thing I should throw out here is that when I was in herb school in Eugene, Oregon, Brandon was in massage school. And I remember, I don't know if you did this with columbines, but I remember one of the things that we had harvested at columbines was this really, really sticky, really potent arnica that grew at high elevation. It was around like the Three Sisters area. Yeah. And I remember learning about it. I remember hiking up with the class, and it's like an area that's covered in snow, like all year, except for like 3 months, right in the middle of the summer. And I remember hiking up to it, and it was in like full flower. And I remember like getting down on my belly and looking at it. It was only like this big. And the plant was like shaking with energy, not because of wind, but because it only has 3 months to grow from its root, produce a flower, get pollinated, mature the seeds, send the seeds out, and then it goes back to dormancy. Like that's a lot of energy needed in 3 months. Yeah. And so I remember really connecting with the intensity and vitality of a plant that has that much adversity to grow through. And I remember I made some arnica oil and I gifted it to Brandon when we were just friends. I think actually I didn't gift it. I think I traded it for a massage. And because that's how, that's how
fair trade. Yeah.
Right. And so he got to experiment with working with this, not just a homeopathic, arnica preparation, but one that was like made by me by something that like you'll never find on the market. Like nobody's going to hike up to like 9,000 feet to like sell, I don't know, maybe somebody will now, but so we had that connection of we were both focused on healing modalities. So then fast forward, it's like 2006, I went to Michael Moore's. So I moved to Prescott in the end of 2006. And we moved in together into this cute little thing called a sugar shack that had like no insulation and no like, oh gosh, it was really cold. And I tried to start an herb school and it didn't work. At that point, I remember I needed to focus on making money. And so I went back to my original calling, which was cooking, professional cooking. And unfortunately, I had quit professional cooking, not because I didn't want to do it, but because I got tendonitis so bad in my right arm, I couldn't actually hold a chef's knife anymore. And that is what ended my cooking career. So then 2 years later, I tried to, actually it was more than 2 years. Like 5 years later, I tried to dive back into cooking, and I did for about 3 months. Then the pain started coming back in my right arm. I lasted another 3 months. I was doing acupuncture and getting massaged regularly. And it's a repetitive motion injury. If you don't stop doing the repetitive motion that's causing the injury, it's never going to heal. So at that point, I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And I was already, I was very blessed. Howie Brownstein had been teaching some classes at a school, a holistic health school down in San Diego called Healing Hands. And he had these classes that he was ready to not teach anymore. So he passed them on to me. So the whole time I was in Prescott, I was going back and forth twice a year. I would go teach on the weekends and then have a week off in between. It was like a working vacation. And there was just a lot more going on. Like I had students
Yeah.
that wanted to take more classes with me. So there's just a lot more going on in San Diego. And Brandon's massage career was doing fine, but nothing to write home about. And you know, I loved his family loved me. All of that was great, but Arizona was not the place for us. So we ended up moving to San Diego, never with the intention of being here this long. And it's been amazing how, like, I have never experienced so much growth as I have here. But mainly it's because, you know, I found a niche, and the niche is that there's a lot of herbalists down here, but there are not a lot of field botanists that are also herbalists. There's not a lot of herbalists that specifically focus on botany. So when I started Sage Country Herbs, originally my first business name that I, you know, legally got was the Ultra Creative Herbs and Nutrition. Because I thought, well, what do I do? Like, I'd like my business name to like say what I do. And so it was like Herbs and Nutrition. Well, that didn't really take off, thankfully. And then I literally woke up one day and I had dreamt of Sage Country Herbs. And the reason I had dreamt it is, once again, bringing up Howie, I had come down and done the Southern California Botanical Adventure with Columbine School 3 separate times.
Wow.
And in that, Howie, when you get down to Southern California, he would introduce us as students to welcome to Sage Country, because we have like hillsides of sage. We have white sage, black sage, Cleveland sage, purple sage, blue sage, hummingbird sage. Whoa, that's a beautiful one. And so that kind of, you know, 10 years later kind of threaded through my dreams, and I woke up going, Sage Country Herbs. And like, just like that, it was like, that's it. It literally was one of those like strike of lightning, like that's going to be the name. And so then I started the field program, because that was there was nothing like it here. So I started the field program. I started first doing just weekends, and then I developed a full like field program. Started bringing in I've got a friend who's a mycologist to do mushroom classes. I've got another friend who studied with the Kumeyaay for 12 years and has their blessing to, and is still in community with them and has their blessing to share their knowledge. And then I started meeting the farms, and then like that really, you know, segued into what we have grown into. So now we're up to 2019. I have an active field apprenticeship, and it's wonderful. I'm teaching at assorted different conferences, and I love that. But one of the things that happened was I was teaching, I wrote 350 hours for Healing Hands, and they have 3 locations. So I was teaching like 600 to 700 hours a year for Healing Hands. And part of that is also driving an hour both ways to get to the different locations. It was dominating a lot of my time. I wanted to expand the field, but I just didn't have the time. And then pandemic hit. And I had all of these classes booked with Healing Hands, but we went into lockdown. So all of a sudden, not only could, like, my classes were cut, so I lost a bunch of money that way. And then it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to develop my second year, of course.
Yeah. And
so then the next year I offered the second year. And then from there, this is to me, a funny part of it. So at that point, I had been doing the field, and then I had a clinical class, I had a nutrition class. And so I would do like one big class, and then that would get over. And then it was like feast or famine. You'd market the class, you've got no money starts rolling in, you teach the class, you live on that money until the class is over. Now you're out of money, and you start marketing your next class. And it was like that, you know, and I was still teaching for Healing Hands. So I still had some, you know, money to help maintain, and Brandon was working as well. But then ultimately, you know, I got to this point where it was like, I officially cannot juggle anything more. I am now juggling like I remember I was describing what it felt like was I was like a tuna boat with like 20 poles in the water, but I was the only fisherman and fisherwoman. And I'm like running around, like trying to, you know, or the other metaphor, of course, is just juggling balls. And I just keep saying, oh yeah, no problem. Throw another one in until I'm at that point where my husband was like, I can only back you up so much, and you need to make sure that you can rest. And and then during the pandemic, I was already teaching classes on Zoom because I would do live classes, but I had some students that were coming from LA and the class would be at 6:00. And I thought it's really inappropriate to expect someone to drive through, 2 to 3 hours of traffic to get to a class that's only 3 hours long. So I would offer it on Zoom and it would be live. And so I was already comfortable doing Zoom. And then the pandemic happened and I started doing every class on Zoom, and I was able to like pile more classes on because I was already comfortable with this platform. And then over the course of the year, Brandon is listening, going like, I've listened to you do the same lecture over and over and over, because keep in mind, Healing Hands also went online. And so now Brandon's listening to me like he's not an herbalist, but he knows herbalism because he's just listened to me over and over. And it was Brandon that had the idea of, we need to get digital Shayna involved so that live Shayna can actually be able to do more of what you want to do. And at that same time, I had an intern who was helping me with organizing. And this intern said to me one day, she said, okay, Shayna, what can we do? She had a background in business. And she said, what can we do to get your 2-year program going? And I was like, what 2-year program? What are you talking about? And she was like, Shayna, I've taken your 1st-year field. I'm signed up for your 2nd-year field. I've taken your nutrition class and I've taken your clinical class. You already have 2 years of classes, my friend. Like, you just need to put them together and create your program. And I was like, oh, like I literally just like, and I was able to get off that feast or famine roller coaster by combining my large courses into a 2-year program that we naturally called Botanical Eyes, because I use that term all the time. And then that allowed us to be able to offer a payment plan. And I really wanted to keep the payments low, because when I was in school and paying payments, I was never one of those people that had like $1,000 that I could just drop on a class. Like, I had to do payments. So I always wanted to keep the payments reasonable. And it was all of a sudden like, oh, wow, I'm very specific about my field program. I will not take more than 7 people out on a group in the 1st year. The 2nd year, we get a little bit bigger because these people are trained. They have their ethics intact. But ultimately, I'm never going to be able to retire just teaching like 12 to 14 people a year, And so realizing that we could do more online, we could do, and that's where Brandon really came into this equation, because he figured out, he's a video editor and he built our website, and he figured out that he can take these classes that I teach over and over and over. He can edit them, and most of them are like 3 to 5 hours. So what we realized is that most people cannot sit through a class for 3 hours, on Zoom that's pre-recorded, right? It's like, I've done it, and like you find yourself kind of falling asleep if there isn't something to engage you. So Brandon started taking like all of my classes. I'm the note handout queen. Like, I love making handouts, and because I talk a lot, so I want people to be able to follow along and not miss things. So Brandon's able to look at my notes and see how the class is like organized. Like, here's the intro, here's the physiology, here's the overview of the herbal actions, here's the herbs. And so then he's able to take my lectures and turn them into like half-hour, punchy segments with beautiful pictures of plants and physiology, and like he's able to make them look really beautiful and engaging. And we've made, study guides to be filling out as you go. And I do a live Q&A every week to answer questions. All of it is not pre-recorded. We have some of it is still live, some of it is in the field, some of it is live, and some of it is pre-recorded. So we are just trying to make it more of an interactive experience, because I understand that there's a lot of people that can't handle going out into the field for 8 hours in a day, that can't squeeze, every other weekend, being away from their family or away from their job. So having this online program and then they can do plant walks with me or 1-day workshops with me. This is all of a sudden just made Sage Country Herbs like blossom like a beautiful, beautiful flower where there's so much more. And then now that we have this really strong foundation, now I want to train my students to continue teaching more. And it's just like chick, 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 it's just happening. It's really, really beautiful. And the last thing I'll say about that is what I have found is that the more that I work in this vein and I put that energy out to nature and the universe about what I'm looking for, and it has worked out where nature and the community is conspiring to work with me. I put it out that I'm looking for this plant. I really want to teach this plant with my second year people. And it took a few years, and I found the most amazing stand of that plant. And it's perfect. And that has now, like a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, I really want to teach about juniper, but I don't have a very good juniper stand, not enough that I feel is enough to warrant, harvesting, but I'd really like to teach about juniper. Within a year, I found this juniper stand, and it's out on private property, but like way in the back of somebody's property. And there's this beautiful juniper that has this perfect little opening that looks like a yoni. And you can go in and you can sit. It's a juniper classroom in the middle of a juniper stand. And that's what I mean by like nature is conspiring with me. As I put it out of what I'm looking for, I just happened to hike along and find a juniper classroom and a juniper tree surrounded by healthy junipers. Like, oh, okay. Same thing happens with the farms. The more I cultivate this relationship, the more farms are coming out of the woodwork. It's just working in this way. That festival, next level. Best marketing I've ever done for our business is just offering a free festival, like free experience. But then I have toured 3 different properties since then of people who came to the festival and were like, oh my gosh, I love the energy that you're cultivating. Can you come and do this on my farm? Like, it's so good. It's so good. Yeah, that was long-winded, but
what a cool evolution. I love how you kind of laid everything out. I did want to say when I took Columbine school, I was on the payment plan too. And I pre-wrote Howie checks every month. And then he started what's called the Mason folder. And I'm pretty sure the Mason folder is still around. So that was my hack to pay him on time every single month. I just pre-write 10 checks or something like that. Also, I just want to say you're like living embodiment of following your heart, following your passion, and then you're clearly get energy from that. And I think it's so cool that you faced your fear of public speaking and you listened to the wisdom of, I'm going to public speak now because I'm talking about what I'm passionate about. And that it just snowballed from there. And like, I bet you're even more energetic and passionate than you've ever been. It's just going to be this positive feedback loop for the rest of your life while you continue to build Sage Country, and we're all better off for it. So thanks for all the work you do. It's pretty incredible, Shayna.
It's my pleasure. The fact that I can now like go and speak in front of 100 people and I don't even get like a hiccup at all. Like, it's amazing. I just want to encourage anybody, face your fears. It is the best thing that you can do for yourself is face your fears and not let it hold you back, because it's literally like it changed the path of my life. And it's one of the best things I ever did. That and honestly, just moving away from home, not to get away from my family, because I love my family, but I encourage anybody in the early 20s, move away from that place that you grew up in where the community has an expectation of who you are. And that's what a lot of people do this with college. But what happens is that outside of other people's expectation of you, you figure out what you are passionate about instead of people being like, oh, because for me, I was lucky as a kid. I went to space camp. When that movie Space Camp came out, all I wanted to do was go. And I remember I was like 9 when the Challenger exploded. And I was one of those kids who watched it. Like we watched the takeoff and we saw the explosion. And that actually only fueled me to want to become an astronaut, which is really weird now that I think about it. But I got to do that. And so everybody in my high school, like when we were going around saying, what are we going to do? Like what path of study? Everybody, when it came to me, everybody said, she's going to be an astronaut, because that was like what I wanted to do from like, 9 years old until I became a hippie environmentalist. I realized that like, oh, that's probably not very well aligned. And so then, when I moved to Oregon, which was not originally my idea, it was one of my good friends was like, let's move to Florida. And I was like, I don't want to move to Florida. And she was like, well, where do you want to move? And I was like, I don't know. I've met really cool people from Oregon. So I moved to Oregon sight unseen. I had never been there. And when I arrived, I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely the
vibe.
The next. Yeah. But it also, by being in a community where, like even the friend that I moved with, we didn't end up both going to Oregon. She ended up going to Colorado and I went to Oregon by myself. One of the scariest things that I've ever done was like being completely alone in a state where I knew one person who was the friend of a friend. And like, that was all I knew. But the doors that opened for me, because I had no restrictions, I had no connections, I had no nothing. So then all of a sudden, like all of these doors, I was open to anything, and all these doors opened. And, as they say, like the rest is history. And I'm just very thankful that I have, lived through my heart in that way. And I just encourage anybody, allow yourself to be challenged in that way. Allow yourself to figure out who you are outside of other people's expectations, because I really surprised myself. I never, ever thought I would be a teacher. And it's my favorite thing to do now.
Yeah, you got to face those fears. I mean, HerbRally is a living embodiment of that as well. And I'm sure the audience is sick of me talking about it. But basically, yeah, I mean, even the herbalist hour, like getting on camera and actually having conversations with my herbalist friends, I was always felt too shy to do that. But now it's like, this is like the most fun I'm having with HerbRally. So.
I know, right? And you're really good at it, Mason. You've got really thought-provoking questions and you're really personable. I was really happy when I heard you were going to start doing interviews, because it just makes sense.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. All it took was like 6 years and 600 episodes of finally just convincing myself to do actual interviews. But we kind of covered a bit of your program, but I definitely know you have some sort of foundational program coming up, and I'd like to have you plug that for the audience.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you so much.
Of course.
So we have this. So the Botanical Eyes is a 2-year, both live and recorded online program. The field program can be taken alongside it, or someone who doesn't do the field can just do this online program. So the way it breaks down is we have 5 courses that all are standalone courses. Each one of those courses could be taken technically by any individual person. However, if you sign up for the full thing, then there's 3 courses in the first year and 2 courses in the second. And we generally have 2 jump-in points. January for the field portion, and that course that runs alongside the field that is online is called Herbal Actions and Energetics. The next time, and the primary time we really want people jumping into the 2-year program, is happening now. We actually have a discount that for Foundational Herbalism. So Foundational Herbalism runs from the end of June through the beginning of October. It's on Thursday nights. Every class is focused on something that I feel every home-based herbalist should know. Tea formulation. We have an Eat Your Weeds class. We do have a common nutrient deficiencies class that is part of this. And the reason is because I feel like if you are going to learn how to, make a formula to help your friend with asthma, and you're going to be using antispasmodic herbs in their asthma formula, if you don't know that magnesium deficiency makes spasms happen much more severely in the body, it will appear like your herbs don't work very well because the spasm's still happening. So we also include some common nutritional deficiencies, because I taught nutrition for many years. Other things that we have, of course, we have like a class on each solvent. We have sweet medicinals covering honey and glycerin, a class on vinegar, a class on oils and salves, a class on alcohol and tinctures. And then we also have classes on the most common ailments and the physiology of those organ systems. So, we go over the physiology of the respiratory system. We do the physiology of the renal system and the kidneys. And then we talk about the herbs that are covered. Originally, I was inspired to do this because the herbal actions and energetics is of Southwest plants. And that meant that I never got to talk about calendula. I mean, you can grow it here, but it's not a, you don't find it just randomly growing. It's a garden plant. I never got to talk about St. John's wort, which was like a big part of learning herbs in Oregon. There's tons of St. John's wort. There's all these, like, I never got to talk about echinacea. Like, it's such a powerful plant, and it's in every health food store. Like, every, set of herbs that you see will have echinacea. So I felt like foundational herbalism was an opportunity to be able to kind of catch my local students up on, here's herbalism in general. These are the foundations of herbal medicine that everybody should know. I also do a smoke as medicine class.
Oh, cool.
Because Howie Brownstein wrote one of the original, books or booklets on smokable herbs. And I really grabbed that torch and ran with it and developed my own class on how to make smokable blends and why they would be appropriate and when they are not appropriate. And so foundational herbalism to me is just, it's a great standalone class, and by the way, so it's each week is pre-recorded. You get like 5 or 6 half-hour videos or so. But then each week we also have a live Q&A and bonus material. And then we also have one day of medicine making where anybody who is local can come together, and we're going to do medicine making and make a bunch of things. We have it scheduled so that people who are, like, right now, we've got somebody from Florida, somebody from Ohio, and somebody from Vancouver, and a couple others. So people who are taking classes from outside of Southern California, if they wanted to, choose to come here for that live experience. I mean, let's face it, coming to San Diego, I know some people aren't really into Southern California, and I totally get that, but mostly it's because of the density of people. But there is so much to do in Southern California. It's a great, like, little weekend vacation spot. And what I'm going to introduce you to is the vast amount of beauty that is, like, we're not going to go to the beach. That's just, it's not my thing. I like to walk on the beach and see the dolphins. It's beautiful, but let's go to the mountains. Let's go to a farm. Let's go to where plants grow. There's not a lot of plants at the beach. It's a lot of ice plant. So I love the idea of being able to provide an environment where somebody could, drive or fly in, have one day, making medicine, maybe go on a plant walk with me the other day, maybe go to Legoland or Disneyland or, the beach if you want. On the other day. So yeah, foundational herbalism is set up to be kind of, I tried to make it the best of all worlds, because I agree, by far the best learning is live. It just is. But I also understand where Brandon is coming from, where I can teach the exact same things every year, but where's the growth for me in that? Like, I'm a forever student. So I love to be able to offer these like pre-recorded classes so that you can listen while you're doing the dishes. You can sit down and take notes. You can, we're going to have audio files so you can listen like you're listening to a podcast while you're in your car driving around. But then there's a live portion every week, and there's a live, medicine making time. There's so much to it. And I think it's just a really great fundamental foundational class that really gets people ready to be herbalists for their communities. And I'll go ahead and throw out a plug for my friend Mel and her podcast, The Herbalist Path. I love her mission to get an herbalist into every household. Yeah. I am such a big proponent of her mission. So I'll throw out, it is such a great thing. And I feel like that's what we're doing with foundational herbalism. We're training people to, even if you don't want to be a teacher, maybe you want to be a medicine maker, maybe you just want to be able to provide for your family, or maybe you want to start, your path in herbalism. Foundational herbalism is a great place to start. I will also say I get people who like me, have already done a full program.
Mhm.
And then they think like I just had somebody who's done a full 2-year program, sees people clinically, they're taking my field class, but they signed up for the full program because it's a better deal. And ultimately what they said is, I really thought I had botanical eyes before I took your class. And I am absolutely shocked at how much I learned. And that is like, I am so honored to be able to get people to realize that it's valuable to take more than one school. It's valuable to study with more than one herbalist because we all have these different perspectives. And, herbal medicine is medicine for the people around the world. That's a Howie tagline. And the more we, study with different people, the more different perspectives we're getting. And so that means that there's always something to learn from someone, and that I will continue taking classes with different people because there's always more to learn. And I love that aspect. And so foundational herbalism is not just for the beginner. It's also for an advanced student who thinks that they already know a lot, but then they'll be shocked when you already know a lot. Just like when I went to Michael's, I already knew a lot of what he was covering, but that allowed me to not have to learn the beginner stuff. I got to be able to pick out those advanced details that really help. That's why we call it foundational herbalism. It's this foundational part that you can build on top. And yeah, it's just been so inspiring to be able to offer. So that comes up in the end of June. Registration is open until June 15th. And we do have a $100 discount off of the cost. Technically, it ends on June 1st, but because we're doing this interview, Mason, we decided to extend it for your listeners. And so we have, I don't know when this is going up, but we're going to extend it at least for a few days so that anybody that wanted to hop in can still get that discount at sagecountryherbs.com.
Since there's some sort of time frame around this, I'll probably expedite it. I'll probably push it ahead of some of the other episodes. So yeah, no big deal there. But I just did want to say, kind of underline your bit about taking multiple different classes. I myself have taken 2 herbalism apprenticeships, studied with lots of different people, and yeah, you always get a different bits of info. And another Howieism is repetition's the key to mastery. So it's great to, and you learning from Howie and then going and study with Michael Moore, you were able to get that deeper bit of knowledge when you took his course. So so that's sagecountryherbs.com where people could learn more about the foundational program.
Yep.
Awesome.
And then we have like the tabs are like field, courses, or program. And you can get to foundational herbalism through the program or through the courses.
Awesome.
Yep.
So it's been an hour and a half. I do want to do one fun question if you got the time.
Sure.
Okay, cool. We're going to do a let's get deep question. Just this is going to be a random question from this deck of cards, and we're going to
Okay.
We're full of surprises here. Have you ever collected anything? If so, what? You know what? I've actually done this one before, so I'm down to choose a different one.
I don't have a fun story for that. Choose a different
Okay, cool. All right, good. Because yeah, I think I've done that one. I did this one too. I'm not doing that one. Okay. Have you ever met any celebrities? Who and where?
Okay, so I saw Jason Momoa at an Ani DeFranco concert in LA. That was pretty cool, but I didn't meet him because I'm not very good with that type of stuff. But I have a funny story that I can share.
Sure.
Of someone I did meet. When I was 2 years old, I was born in LA. We moved to Michigan when I was 3. So when I was 2 years old, my parents used to like to go to like Universal Studios, and they took me there, and they were filming The Incredible Hulk. And Lou Ferrigno, all decked out in his green makeup, came out to meet people. And I was ridiculously shy as a child. I was terrified. My dad loves to tell the story that like he's holding me and I literally start climbing down his back to hide from this crazy large green man. But Lou Ferrigno's wife was apparently pregnant with their first daughter, and he was really into kids. And so he wanted to come over and meet me, but I was so scared. He apparently, according to my family, he said, will you guys hang out here for just a little bit? I'm going to go take my makeup off and then I can come back and meet little Shayna. And so that's what happened. We went and got some food, I guess, and then came back, and he came back out without his makeup. So, and he was like, you know, holding me somewhere. There's probably a picture of him holding me. And now I don't have confirmation on this, but the interesting thing about the story is that Lou Ferrigno's firstborn, her name is Shayna.
Wow. Okay.
I did reach out to her on Instagram and said, hey, family story from my world. Do you know if this is true? Crickets, never got any answers. So I'm like, I don't know. Maybe it's just a little like, you know, one of my like parents' little like fanciful stories about, you know, my impact on the world, but
that's hilarious. Shayna Ferrigno.
I met the Incredible Hulk, the original.
That's hilarious. Yeah. So the rules of the game is I have to answer two. And I actually met Barack Obama, if you could believe it. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. So I was working at the hospital. This was before his first campaign. So I must have been like 2006 or 2007. And I was working at the hospital, and he was visiting Eugene, Sacred Heart, if you recall your Eugene days. And I heard he was there, and I was like, oh, that'd be cool to go meet him. So I ran upstairs, and he was just going around in a circle, shaking people's hands. And like, I shook his hand and said, nice to meet you and stuff. So that was pretty, interesting. Right on. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Shayna. We got through about half of our questions, so this would have been like a 4-hour show, but I would love to have you back on, and, you know, we could go over some more questions and then promote what you have going on in the future. That would be awesome. But in the meantime, dear listener, go to sagecountryherbs.com. And you know what? I feel like you said there was some sort of discount associated with the foundations course. Did you mention that, or is that on your website?
Well, both. I mentioned it, and it is on the website. Basically, anybody who signs up, we have it on the website. It says until June 1st. We will push that back a couple of days. So anybody that signs up, and you can pay for it all at once, or you can pay in payments, you'll get that $100 off automatically. It won't go up until we literally go in and change it. And so anybody who signs up, basically in the next few days, you'll get that discount. You don't have to do a code or anything. It'll just automatically be.
I hear you. Okay, cool. Yeah. And the payment plan will be called the Mason folder. No, not really. Okay.
Good name.
Well, yeah. So right on. Let's do a round two someday, Shayna. Thanks y'all for listening. And thanks you so much for joining us, Shayna. And we'll see y'all in the next episode. Take care.
Bye.
All right.
Hey everyone, this is Mason with HerbRally. Thanks so much for watching today's video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and also go ahead and subscribe. We come out with new herbal content each and every week. If you didn't know, HerbRally also lists herbalism events. We list herbalism events chronologically. We list them also by state. So you could just go ahead and search by Oregon or Wisconsin or wherever you live. You can find out what herbalism events are happening in your neck of the woods. We also list herbalism events, virtual herbal events. So if you can't make it to an in-person conference or plant walk, we list lots of virtual events as well. To find out more, you could go to herbrally.com/events or herbrally.com/virtual. But if you can help it, I would highly recommend trying to go to an herbalism conference. Those are some of the best learning experiences I've ever had, and that's where you can find different herbal teachers, and then maybe you could perhaps take their apprenticeship. But yeah, just do what you can. Get out there and learn about the herbs, you know, like yarrow, dandelion, corn, you know, all the above, like all the medicinal herbs. And we'll see you out there. Hope to see you at an herb conference. All right, bye.